Welcome to the Wellness Revolution podcast, the radio show all about wellness in your mind, body, spirit, personal growth, sex, and relationships. Stay tuned for weekly interviews featuring guests that have achieved physical, mental, and spiritual health in their lives. If you'd like to have access to our entire back catalog, visit drveronica.com for instant access. And here is your host, Dr. Veronica.
Welcome again to another episode of the Wellness Revolution. We're going to talk today about the science behind living happy, thin, and free. Did I say that right? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter because you want to know it anyway. Okay. America, we're having an obesity epidemic. It's a big, big, big deal. Everybody's trying to lose weight. And what's even frustrating now is that people have tried so hard, they're now just giving up and saying, I'm going to be sick and overweight. This is not the way we want to do it. There's science behind it. And today I have a New York Times best-selling author. How about that? Dr. Susan Thompson. And we're going to talk about her journey and her best-selling book and how to be happy, fit, free, thin, all this other stuff that you never can be too rich or too thin. Can you be too rich or too thin? But anyway, let's talk about this. So Dr. Susan, welcome to the Wellness Revolution. So first, tell us about your own weight loss journey.
Oh, it was long and arduous, actually. I always used to think that I was a normal weight kid, but actually looking back at pictures now, and I have 3 daughters. My twin girls are turning 9. And my littlest one is 5. So I have a sense of what, average weight kids, my kids are average weight. And when I look back now at pictures as when I was a kid, I was overweight and I didn't think that I was. I don't remember feeling fat as a little kid, but I wasn't fat, but I was pretty pudgy. But by the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I weighed more than I weigh now. By the time I was, I think I started my first diet when I was 10.
Wow.
And by the time I was 14, I had discovered that drugs would help me stay thin. So I did mushrooms and lost a lot of weight. One night doing mushrooms, I lost 7 pounds. And that stuck in my head. And so from the age of 14 to the age of 20, I did drugs to try to not have to eat and not think about food and to have fun and to party, but also to keep weight off me. It didn't really work. I mean, I was still overweight, all except for a brief time when I was 17 when I found crystal meth and did that until I bottomed out on that pretty hard. So anyway, by the time I was 20, I bottomed out on crack cocaine. I dropped out of high school. I'd burned my life to the ground. And I was blessed to get clean and sober. And then I packed on a lot of weight, like boom, that fast. Probably gained, 60 pounds in like a breath. Is what it felt like. And, I'm 5'3", like 60 pounds. That's like, that's for
half your body.
Man, that's like gaining 100 pounds, like it's not a little bit of weight. That's enough to put me into the obese category on the BMI chart. And my weight continued to climb. I did hit the obese category on the BMI chart. And all through my 20s, my weight climbed up and down and up and down and up and down, but the trajectory was up. And, every couple of years, another 10-pound marker, like at first for me, overweight was the 140s, then it was the 150s, then it was 160s, then it was it just kind of kept going up and up and up. And, I tried 12-step programs to help and experienced varying degrees of success. There's lots of different 12-step food programs. I did finally fall into a group of people who were not eating sugar, not eating flour, weighing and measuring their food, and eating 3 meals a day with nothing in between. And that's what I ended up doing that ended up working. And so I lost my excess weight. That was back in 2003. And I've been a size 4 now for, 14 years, coming up on 14 years, which I don't know if you know this, Veronica, the statistics are so abysmal for weight loss that if you've been obese, the odds of you getting into a right-sized body and living there for 10 years or more, those odds are 1/100th of 1% of people do that. 1/100th of 1%. It's almost unheard of. Yeah. So then I started to help other people to lose their weight. And I forgot, like after I got clean and sober, I went to college and then graduate school, got a Ph.D. in brain and cognitive sciences, became a tenured psychology professor, and started teaching a college course on the psychology of eating, in particular, the neuroscience of food addiction. And finally, in 2014, my worlds of, my private life where I was helping people to lose weight and my academic career where I was teaching students about the neuroscience of food addiction, they kind of came together, and I wrote a book and started this movement called Bright Line Eating. So that's the trajectory in a nutshell.
Okay, so that's an amazing, absolutely amazing story, because I'm listening to you talk about how you were a drug addict, taking the hardest drugs. America is in a drug epidemic right now, and people are dying at epidemic proportions in midlife from these really hard drugs. And you're saying, wow, I've been there. And you talk about it starting probably when you say you were 10, because you started discovering that some of these drugs could keep you thin. But let's step back from that, because now you're a psychology professor. Do you feel that you were an addict back then? Did you have some of these addictive tendencies that drove you towards eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think of addiction now on a continuum. I used to think of it as a binary distinction where you're an addict or you're not an addict. And I now think of it more as a continuum. And I have a scale called the susceptibility scale that goes from 1 to 10 that tells you how susceptible your brain is to food addiction, essentially. And I think over the years, I climbed up that scale. I think I started with a genetic predisposition, and I think I started with environmental susceptibility as well. And I think that triggers and cues in my environment continued to layer on the addiction until I was, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was hopelessly addicted. When I was 10, was I a food addict? I was probably a nascent, budding, embryonic food addict. I was probably higher on the susceptibility scale even at that point than a lot of people will ever be in their whole lifetime. But I don't think I was a 10 on the susceptibility scale yet. I got to be a 10. Does that make sense?
I get it. So I want to ask this question because people believe that if you're fat, it's just inherited. The other 3 days ago, last week on Facebook, a person said, well, it's inherited, so there's nothing you can do, so stop talking about fat people. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is that, our genes have been pretty stable in our population for the last 100 years, but our body mass on average has not been. So I think the better explanation is the environment. Now, it's probably, as with all interesting human traits, a gene-environment interaction, where it's probably the case that certain triggers in the environment, particularly, a solution bath of sugar, fat, and salt, or sugar, flour, fat, and salt that we're putting, into our fast foods and stuff like that, are bathing our cells. And now what's happening is it's called epigenetics, where genes are turned on or turned off by our environmental triggers. So probably genes for obesity that were lying dormant in our population for many years are being turned on by the foods that we eat. But what we see on Bright Line Eating is people, even with profound genetic susceptibility, people who are morbidly obese, whose whole families are morbidly obese, are getting slender and staying slender. So it's not pure genes, it's genes plus what you're eating. I mean, you don't have to go back that far, just 100 or 200 years, to find a population where 99% of the population was at a normal weight. So it's just not the case that it's genetic. It's the case that we're eating differently, and that's turning on genes maybe that are present in some people and not in others.
Okay, thank you for that. Just because when I say these things and write, people jump all over you because you put science out there, and most people will tell you how, well, that's science, but my body's different. And I like that you pointed out that, 100 years ago, 99% of the population was normal weight. When you go to a lot of other parts of the world, the population is normal weight. When you step into America, all of a sudden, somebody who's big in someplace else is actually tiny here. And so we really are large here in America. So why do you think it is so much here in America versus the rest of the world, although the rest of the world is getting bigger too? What do you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's just our eating patterns, right? We're eating more refined foods, and bigger portions. We're just eating more than they are in other parts of the world. We're also eating the foods that are addictive that make you eat more. So it's not just a calories in, calories out phenomenon. It's also that the foods that you choose to eat today will influence how much you're going to eat tomorrow. So if you eat, cookies, cake, pizza, fast food, those sorts of foods, basically foods loaded with sugar and flour, they wire the brain for addiction, and that forces you to eat more tomorrow. So we're just overloading on the addictive foods. If you go into a U.S. supermarket, 80% of the calories have added sugar in them. And, so we're exporting that diet, though, actually in sheer numbers, and this is just because their populations are so large. China and India lead the world in numbers of obese people, overweight and obese people, just because their populations are mammoth. And the Middle East leads the world in type 2 diabetes. And actually, the Middle East is right on par with us in terms of obesity rates. Up until 2006, the Middle East actually led the world in obesity rates. In 2006, we passed them for a little bit, but we're pretty much neck and neck. If we keep going at this pace, plenty of places in the world, including the United States, will have a 50% obesity rate by 2030. 50% obesity. We have about a third right now obesity rate, and that's going to climb up to 50%. We're headed for, the diabetes rates are already off the charts, but it's going to get really bad. We cannot afford financially, in terms of just human potential that gets wasted, because when you're overweight and that sick, like you're just waiting for your life to begin until you lose the weight, essentially, and we've got 108 million Americans trying 4 or 5 new dieting attempts each year with no hope of success.
Wow. Wow. So you got to hold up your book. And I just got to say to the audience, Dr. Susan's in her car coming from the gym. So part of this is about eating. I always tell people, listen, and we talk about the number one thing is what's on the end of your fork, but you also got to move. And you saw that bright line eating, the science of living.
Yeah. Happy,
thin, and free. The science of living happy, thin, and free. So step one, you took back control of this. You went down the road where many people don't return from that road of addiction, from not just food, but from really hard addictive drugs. How did you take back control of your life?
Well, with the drugs, I went to a 12-step program, and I just surrendered myself to that program. I did what they told me to do. And I went to a lot of meetings, and I got a sponsor, and I worked the steps and all that good stuff. So I'm a big fan of 12-step programs. And, with food, it was much the same, although it didn't kind of work right away the way it did with drugs and alcohol. It took years and years and years. For me, I had to get sort of bludgeoned into submission by the food. I had to reach a point where I was really, really desperate and really done, where I wanted to be happy, thin, and free more than I wanted to lose myself in the comfort of that food. I really, really wanted the misery to stop. Eating sort of turned on me and became sort of a source of misery. And it took a long time to kind of get to the point where I was really done. And then, when I got to that point, I surrendered sugar in all forms. I surrendered flour in all forms. I committed to eating 3 meals a day with nothing in between, and I started weighing and measuring my food. And it's interesting you mentioned that I came from the gym, because I did not exercise to lose my weight. And I recommend people do not exercise to lose their weight. I rested, and I took it easy, and I focused on getting my food dialed in and automatic in the early stages. I only started, hitting the gym for fun, and for all the other healthful benefits of it, for brain health, for all that stuff. But working out doesn't help you lose weight. Actually, you need to rest to lose weight.
It's interesting you would say that, just because when I start people on programs, I do not focus on exercise at all. I don't even mention exercise. Interestingly, when people say, well, why are you overweight? They say, well, I don't have time to get to the gym. So people feel that their lack of going to the gym is what's causing them failure, when in fact it's not. And when I start people on programs, I start them off with just changing little bits of their eating. And when they see that they can lose massive amount of weight by making small changes, the first thing they realize is, no, I don't. Now, the gym is good for other reasons, but no, exercise is not going to be the key. And 2, I really have power over this. And it wasn't that big of a deal. I've had this guy, he was huge, and in 5 weeks, he lost like 45 pounds. And he's like, I did this, and I wasn't hungry, and it wasn't hard. Now, I'm not going to say it's not going to be hard for everybody. I'm not saying that, but it was like he was surprised that how little changes we made week by week. And I said, I just want you to focus on this. This is all I want you to do. This little bit, just do this little bit well, and do that for 7 days, and then report back, and we'll go to the next step.
I love it.
People have massive results, and then all of a sudden, once they get those results, they start feeling like they want to go exercise themselves. They start exercising before I mention it. Yeah. So I'm happy you said, I didn't do it. Exercise isn't going to get you there, because you cannot exercise enough. Now, you're a psychologist. You study the science behind eating. My background is in neuroscience. I love it. How does the brain block weight loss?
Yeah, well, you were just talking about that people start to exercise on their own. And I was thinking, well, I know why that's happening, because their leptin is getting back on board. So leptin seems to be the holy grail. Leptin is the hormone that it's the feedback hormone that you would think that we would have. Basically, if you start to put on weight, getting too fat's not healthy. It's not evolutionarily advantageous, right? So once you start to put on weight, your fat cells secrete this hormone called leptin that circles back up to the brain and says, hey, we got enough fuel on board. Don't focus on eating anymore right now. Stop eating and go use this fuel for activities that are going to help ensure your survival in other ways. Go build a hut. Go find a mate. Go kill a wildebeest. Go, do productive things, right? And so it's the hormone that tells your brain you're not full, you're not hungry anymore, you're full now, and go get active. And the problem is that our brains are blocking us from seeing the leptin that's circulating in our blood. Like, it's true that we have leptin. We're getting fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. Those fat cells are releasing leptin, lots of it, into our bloodstream. The trouble is our brains aren't seeing it. And what's blocking it is insulin. So it's really critical to get your insulin levels down. This is where cutting out sugar and flour becomes really helpful, really critical. And if you have an addictive tendency like I do, cutting it out with a bright line, that's where the term bright line eating comes from. A bright line is just a clear boundary that you never cross. Like, if you're going to quit smoking, you're not going to do it in moderation. You're just going to quit smoking. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that, if you try dabbling with the nicotine moderation program, you're going to make yourself crazy, and it's not going to work. You're not going to get healthy that way. So some things you just have to quit because they're too addictive. So I coach people to quit sugar and flour, and all of a sudden, they start to want to exercise because their leptin's getting back on board, which is making them want to get active again.
Okay, so I had a guy I talked to one day. He was thinking about becoming a client. And he said, am I going to have to give up bread? I said, at least for a while. And he said, not joining. So now let's talk about what we replace it with. Just because I tell people you still can enjoy eating. There are lots of wonderful foods out there that you can eat. You can enjoy eating. We all enjoy eating. Eating is important to all of us. You talked about comfort food and things like that. So once people are quitting sugar and flour, what type of replacement are you recommending so that they still feel like I'm getting something that I really enjoy?
Yeah, I don't think of it in terms of replacement foods, and it's a good way to think about it. I guess mostly I just feel like, if you want to keep eating your bread, I can't help you. Like, go eat your bread. You know what I mean? Like, bright line eating is not for everybody. And I think that, we have free will and we get choices in this life. And if you want to eat your way, up the scale and into diabetes and all that stuff, and the bread is more important to you than getting healthy, then I got nothing for you, So I always kind of say that, like, I'm not in the convincing business. I'm here to help the people who are like dying for a solution. They would stand on their head in the corner and eat shoe leather. They don't care. They're like, just, get this weight off me, and I need peace because I'm crazy with food. I can't stop eating, and I'm overweight, and, and nothing has worked. Like, I have given all of these programs my full heartfelt effort, and 6 months later, I'm fatter than ever. Like, something has got to stop here. So those are my people. Just saying. Like, the guy who wants to eat his bread he's not my guy. You know what I mean? So go eat your bread. On the other hand, I'm with you, sister. Like, we love our food in Bright Line Eating. Like, we're not eating sawdust. We're not eating shoe leather. Like, that's the good news. You don't have to eat shoe leather. So, for example, I just got to say, roasted butternut squash is freaking delicious. And, a big Honeycrisp apple is yummy. And in the morning, I have a big bowl of oatmeal, gluten-free oats with, some, these days I'm really loving almond yogurt. Kind of a random thing, but a big mound of raspberries and some ground flax seeds and some nuts on there and a ton of cinnamon. And I'm sorry, that's a delicious bowl of food right there, So anyway, there's lots of foods that you can eat that are yummy. We eat basically every whole natural real food there is. We eat in Bright Line Eating. Every protein, every vegetable, every fruit, every grain, every legume. Like, if it's a whole real food, we eat it. The only foods we don't eat are the bastardized, commercialized, packaged, adulterated, crappy food that isn't really food. It's frankenfood. So there's plenty of delicious food to eat. And the other thing I want to say is your taste buds. Those cells in your taste buds, they only live 2 weeks long. Every cell in your taste buds is a new cell every 2 weeks. So your taste for food is going to change dramatically when you stop eating. At first, that food tastes so good, but when you stop eating it, you don't really want it anymore. You start to love the taste of whole, real food. So I know people feel desperate when they think about giving up sugar and flour, but that's also actually the brain talking. That's dopamine downregulation talking when they feel that really pleasureless, my life is going to be over if I can't have my bread. Like, it's too bad we couldn't go back to him and just say, like, dude, that's not you talking. That's just dopamine downregulation. Like, those receptors will grow back and you'll be fine without your bread.
Yeah, and the other piece that I find talks in people is a lot of people have yeast overgrowth, and the yeast is telling them to eat all those carbs too. So there's all kinds of parts of the body that are causing people to have these cravings where they can't give it up. And I love that you said, yeah, it's 2 weeks, because I tell people, listen, your taste buds are just clearly going to change. Believe me, they're going to change. And so some people, when they come in and they're kind of kicking and screaming and they're really scared, they think there's food I tell them to eat that they say, I didn't like this in the beginning, but this is actually really good and I look forward to it. So I think that is the taste buds changing. Now, we talked about leptin. I teach a lot of my clients about timing eating. Do you also talk about eating and the timing of eating their food, a certain amount of time between and all that other type of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we have a general rule of thumb, like eat breakfast at breakfast time, lunch at lunchtime, dinner at dinner time. Ideally 4 to 6 hours between meals, let your body digest one meal before you eat another. I think there's great new research on how each organ of the body has its own circadian rhythm cells. So like and they get reset when you eat. So if you're eating at regular meal times, your small intestine, large intestine, stomach will come to expect food at the right time, and it'll set its 24-hour clock by your eating. So eating at consistent times is really helpful. There's also really good research that having a nice long fasting window, meaning, finish your dinner by 6, for example, don't eat your breakfast the next morning until 8 a.m. Now you've got a 14-hour fasting window on board. Like, you have not put anything in your mouth of caloric value for 14 hours. That starts a process called autophagy, which is the cells recycling their broken and dysfunctional parts, including your mitochondria, which are your energy centers, which means that your energy starts to replenish and get stronger and stronger and stronger if you have a good fasting window. So there's a lot of important stuff around meal timing that's starting to come out, especially in the circadian rhythm world.
Okay, so I have to ask you a question. Is autophagy the same thing as autophagy?
Yes.
No, I'm just saying, what's that word that I don't know? And I was just like, wait a minute. Okay, so
yeah,
I got it. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who don't know out there, it's about, pretty much the body cells eating kind of themselves, but not the same way in autoimmunity. So this autophagy or autophagy is actually a process you want to happen versus autoimmunity, which a lot of times keeps going on from too much sugar and too much flour. And so first thing that I tell people when they have any autoimmune, my friend called me up yesterday and said, how can I get rid of this arthritis and swelling? I say, you're not going to like my aunt's answer. She's like, I'm not giving up my sugar and my bread. And I'm like, okay, then this is where you are. You've decided that you want to stay the way you are, and I'm cool with that. Okay.
There you go.
You have a boot camp that people can go to, because I know some people are saying, I got to get it together. What do I do? And you're doing this in a way that the body supports, that biochemistry supports, that we're meant to be. This is not like the TV shows that we see where it's the worst thing in the world, and then they tempt people by putting food in front of them to see if they're going to fall down. This is not what your boot camp is about. Your boot camp, I can tell, just everybody knows we're talking the same principles. People who've listened to me enough know that we're talking the same language here. How do we get involved in your boot camp?
So it's called the Bright Line Eating Boot Camp, and it's an 8-week program, but it's fully online. So you don't have to travel to it. It's not at a certain destination. We've had people from 75 countries from all over the world take the boot camp. It's all on your computer. All you need is internet access to participate. And so you can check it out by going to our website, brightlineeating.com. That's BRIGHTLINE, brightlineeating.com. And so 10,000 people have done it. People lose on average 17 pounds in 8 weeks on average. We've got people who've lost 45 pounds in 8 weeks, people coming from bigger numbers. And on average, people keep that weight off and keep losing after the boot camp. And we've got a program after the boot camp called Bright Lifers that just continues people on their journey. We have our data is showing we have the most successful weight loss program on planet Earth by far, actually, not even close. So we're just starting to publish those data, and it's really exciting.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate so much your time, your research, hearing where you came from, having somebody lead the charge that has been from probably what we see is the worst case that we see on TV, people who are just falling off the earth. And this is a big deal now between drugs and eating. Those are the two things that are making America go down the tubes. We can't lead the world when we're fat and drugged out. We're addicted, fat and drugged out. And so if we're worried about what's going on in our White House, we need to look in our own house, and that means our bodies, to be able to get it together before we can criticize anything else. And so, Dr. Susan Thompson, I thank you so much. Bright Line Eating, the science of happy, thin, and free. And everybody knows that if they look in the show notes, they'll be able to get a link to your book. And I'll also make sure we have a link to the website where they can get to the boot camp also. So thank you. Parting words, anything else you want to tell us?
Oh, just, that we're poised for a revolution. Like, just be aware and start being part of the solution. Like, we can't feed our kids the way we've been feeding them. Restaurant, children's menus on restaurants and stuff, our expectations for, food at celebrations and birthday parties and stuff. We got to start to upgrade our expectations and our standards of what we call food and what we serve as food, because we're killing ourselves and we're killing each other.
Thank you for listening to the Wellness Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more on how to bring wellness into your life, visit drveronica.com. See you all next week. Take care.